Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani, and welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism, narcissistic relationships, and how to heal from these narcissistic relationships. So, for a while now, for the past few months, and I've been doing it more intensely recently, I've been preparing a course that is focused on teaching therapists on how to work with clients who are experiencing narcissistic abuse. It's been a major slog because I've been reading hundreds of articles on narcissism to help teach therapists how to teach clients about narcissism, right? There's really very little research, almost none done on what happens to the people in the narcissistic relationship, but there's tons and tons on the narcissistic people. Big surprise. And all of this research has taken me to some interesting and frankly dark spaces as I see people taking this conversation about how antagonistic personality styles such as narcissism show up in relationships, and the entire conversation turns more into sort of an intellectual debate. Now, a lot of the research and scholarly work out there is actually about how hard it is to be narcissistic. I kid you not. That narcissistic people are locked into an internal battle with their demons and shame, and because of that, they have to lash out at the world or wrap themselves up in a comforting blanket of grandiosity. After all, they've been through stuff, and they have been through stuff, and yeah, maybe their parents protected them too much or indulged them or ignored them, and now they resent that they can't do stuff themselves. It's not untrue. It's a terrible legacy to have a narcissistic personality. You have no ability to have a truly healthy relationship. You always feel like people are out to get you. Narcissistic people frequently envy other people and covet their lives. But I gotta say, in the same breath, it's not all bad. And the narcissistic folks take that arrogant and bombastic style of theirs and their variable empathy that goes up and down as it suits them, and that drive they have to be the best and the top and the one in power, and they end up making a lot more money than the rest of us, or they just betray us and take advantage of us in the workplace, or just take advantage of everyone, which they feel entitled to do. But yep, most of this literature is not about all that good stuff. It's mostly about how much the narcissistic people suffer, but not about how the people in the relationships with them do. And sometimes there's a sentence at the end of these articles that makes reference to how these relationships might take a toll on other people, or in clinical jargon we'll say, cause social impairment. Gotta say, I think that misses something big here. The actual suffering of people in these relationships. And yeah, that's most of you. People want to understand, anyone who's ever been through one of these relationships wants to understand how someone who claims to love them, who may be ostensibly successful, who sometimes turns it on and convinces us that yes, this is okay, and then boom, just as you need them, or they're having a bad day, or your needs are not in alignment with theirs, it all falls apart, and this feels awful. But it's more than just you feeling awful. It's the breaking you down, the stealing your voice, stealing your sense of trust in yourself, your identity, your sense of perception and reality. Because of this treatment, you're anxious, you're on edge, you feel like you're not enough. This isn't just social impairment. This is often straight up devastation for people who have experienced narcissistic relationships. Again, after months steeped in this really scientific, technical, and clinical literature, I can see how the narcissistic people are the ones who are actually pulling for all of the clinical curiosity and care from people who are trying to devise better treatments for narcissism. But the group that is being left behind are the ones who are actually suffering in these relationships. When we turn this into an intellectual argument and talk about the structural dynamics and the way that the narcissistic personality works and what they are warding off and their shame and all the rest of it, we simply miss the real raw emotion of what is happening to people in these relationships. It's as though, oh, come on, now that you understand how the narcissistic person works, don't be so bothered about it. It's like being mad at a mosquito, right? You know that the only reason the mosquito is biting you is because the little guy just needs some blood, so it sticks that pointy, bloody thing, blood-sucking thing into you and makes that whistly sound. It's not personal. It's just how that mosquito survives, right? But it's not that technical, and this isn't a mosquito. Ironically, lashing out at you and manipulating you and controlling you is how a narcissistic person survives, I guess, psychologically. That person also sometimes is nice. Narcissistic folks are part of our life histories, and ultimately, while you knowing the dynamics is important so you don't blame yourself and can be told that just because the narcissistic person doesn't value you and the things that you are and care about doesn't mean that they aren't valuable. Remember that. Those things about you are, even if the research doesn't want to highlight what you're going through. The idea of the person who's harmed by the narcissistic relationship, at best being an afterthought in these conversations, enrages me. And after reading hundreds of pieces of research, it's true. There is no accountability of the harm that these relationships cause. It's as though the prevailing wisdom is to learn to live alongside them, like the mosquitoes. But the public health folks actually at least know that the mosquitoes are not good for us, and so they tell us to wear bug repellent or avoid being outside certain times of the day or make sure that there's no standing water. I guess the equivalent of that for narcissism is that we disengage and cultivate other sources of support. But we don't talk, at least not in the scientific and clinical literature, about how to teach clients how to protect themselves from these relationships. But turning this into a structural and mechanical conversation about narcissism misses the very real and lasting harm that these relationships have on people. But the folks who talk about the harm of narcissistic abuse are actually far outnumbered by the people who talk about the myriad tiny things that make up a narcissistic person. Listen, I get that all these well-meaning researchers' ultimate goal is to see if we can change the narcissistic people. But I gotta be honest, I don't see that as a realistic short or midterm goal. But in the interim, as they figure out ways of doing therapy with the narcissistic folks, this is an acknowledgement that the lifelong or short-term pain of these narcissistic relationships is real. We aren't talking about it enough, and sure, if you want to support the narcissistic folks, I think that's great. I'm a big believer in empathy all around, but not to the detriment of the unacknowledged pain and experience of those who are in these relationships. And I think that when we do just make this a technical conversation, like, okay, this is what it is, and we don't need to talk about this other part. After reading so much of this research, I have to say, it is no wonder that this field is doing very little to protect people experiencing narcissistic abuse. They don't want to recognize it, and we're not going to let that happen. Thanks again.